Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets are moving towards the NBA trade deadline. Where does the value stand on players like Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neale, Spencer Dinwiddie? And is this team ready, finally, to start to move towards some of the youth? We dive in, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets. Every single day over there, you'll find Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbert. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. And Doug, fresh off a loss, the Brooklyn Nets are pushing towards the deadline, and I think it's finally time to say, where do we stand? Is this team going to make moves, and have they ultimately made some missteps in when the highest value was there for key veterans like Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neale?
Yeah, look, this has been the talking point for a while now with the Nets about sort of like how they would approach this trade deadline. We've heard lots of different rumors. We've heard lots of different just things being thrown out there. I think some is coming from the Nets front office as sort of like, I don't know, as a way to just either grease the wheels on some of these moves or just kind of evaluate what the overall market is going to be. I think, there's a lot. I would go on a player level. And just as a note too, we're recording this Tuesday night following the game, right? So because we're live on YouTube as we go through some of the stuff following the Dallas game. But as we head into the trade deadline, actually, let's start here with the first. Mikal Bridges. It seems like they've gotten offers. It seems like teams have said, they're willing to unload a significant amount of draft capital. Do you think there's any chance that Bridges is dealt before the deadline? This is the big one.
No, obviously not. Okay. The Brooklyn Nets don't seem interested in doing it. From what we can gather, it seems like the Nets want to be positioned to go pursue a star potentially in the offseason to add into this core. They can always choose to change their mind, but at least publicly, right? What we're hearing from the Nets is it's not even we'd have to be overwhelmed. We are not interested in trading Mikal Bridges at this time. You and I think both agree that's a mistake based on some packages that have been discussed, but it doesn't look like that's anything that they're going to consider ahead of the deadline.
Yeah, so two things about Bridges, and then we'll get into DFS and Royce and Spencer and all these other guys because there's plenty of guys to talk about. One thing I'll say about Bridges is I stand firm, and there's really only one package I would accept, and that's like Rockets, all the picks and swaps back. Short of that, I don't think there's other packages from other teams that were just going to be good for a while that I would accept. Sorry, go ahead. And I have one more point about that.
No. And I would say, I'd say I slightly differ from you in that you could tell me a team that offers a 4 first-round pick package and maybe a player, et cetera, for Mikal Bridges, where I would be at least more interested or intrigued by it than you would. When I talk with Matt George from Locked On Kings, the idea of a Kings team, that's not a franchise that has a track record of stable success. So I can think about some longer-term assets from specific teams that might interest me for him, though I'd be hard-pressed.
Yeah, okay, so, yeah, and this is all like, look, it's all about what the deals available were, and sometimes you just don't know what those are going to be. The other thing I will say is, whether I was trading Bridges or not, this is exactly what I would also say as a front office. I would never admit it because obviously you're not like, yeah, we're shopping him, and then you don't do it, and then you have a guy that thinks you're going to get traded. So I don't think it like matters too much for me that they've made strong suggestions / statements that have said we're not going to scare, because I would say the same exact thing and then still feel okay trading him. That being said, I also don't think they're trading him. Right. So I think that like in the end, that's where it's going to be. And look, there's a strong case for keeping Mikal Bridges, a very strong case, right? He's on a ridiculously good contract. He can fit and pair with any guy that you end up maybe bringing in like at a superstar level. He'll fit with any scheme. So there's like lots of very good reasons to keep him. The only reason we had mentioned the Rockets piece was because it was a little more, holding your own destiny or controlling your own destiny, maybe realizing that this reboot was going to be a real big, like an uphill climb. And maybe now in a landscape of the NBA where many teams are just trying to be good, sometimes there is benefit to not being the best team for a couple years if everyone else is trying, right? And so, but it doesn't look like that is going to end up being the case. As far as the rest of the trade deadline, I mean, we can probably go through some of these guys and where we think they're going to end up landing when it's all said and done.
Yeah, let's separate out one more guy here, I think, before we talk about some of the veterans. Nic Claxton, right? Because this also, so the reports are also now that the Nets are not interested in moving him, but unlike with Mikal Bridges, it's being speculated unless the package blew them away. Right now, define what a package looks like that blows the Brooklyn Nets away. That's a TBD. Liking him, as we say with all these players, loving him as a player and a talent and his skill set, 100%. But this is another one of those examples for me where if Brooklyn is uncertain about their intentions with him when it comes to the offseason, then you need to be open to what the packages could look like here. Is there a trade package for him if it's a first-round pick and other things? If it's not 2 first-round picks, is there a threshold where you say, I'll get to the offseason? Because my thinking has also been there's also a sign and trade ability here with Nic Claxton. If the Nets want to pursue a star, you can also start to create money matching ability with a player like him in the offseason as well.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be that incentivized to just like rush to send him out right here unless you were, like they said, or was reported totally blown away with a package. I don't think you need to do that. I think he has value for you this year. I think there's a chance the market doesn't develop in like a massive way and you're able to get him on a decent contract. I think that that's a reasonable,
having him on your team.
Reasonable expectation. If you look at teams that maybe have the scratch to go out and spend for a center in the offseason, I'm not sure that list is super long. So I'm not sure, I think he'll command some money, but I don't know if it's going to be massive. So I think they might also look at this and say, we're going to get him back in a contract. He fits what we're doing. I think that there's that wouldn't bother me at all. And again, I don't think the market on him has been really robust either.
No.
I'm sure there's been calls, and I doubt that they've become anywhere close to getting blown away. And I think that's fine. I think he's not a guy that they have to be rushing to move on from.
He also represents, by the way, and then we'll move on in our next segment to some of the veterans. He also represents what I wish was more like baseball, where teams will often trade guys away as a rental for the remainder of the season and then bring them right back in free agency. You never get those opportunities in the NBA, but that's something that plays a factor for other teams as well. He's on an expiring contract, so there's no guarantee what you're buying beyond helping your team get better and more versatile defensively over the short term for a playoff run. Coming up here in a second, let's talk about the vets. Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neale. Where's the market stand on them right now, and how low of a asking price should the Brooklyn Nets be willing to set? We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you our friends over at Nissan. If you're the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further, ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of top SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventures to the next level. You got the Nissan Pathfinder, the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room up to 8 expansive cargo capacity, advanced available 4x4 capability, 284 horsepower, up to 6,000 pounds of towing. So you can put something on the back of that thing and make sure you're not going to be squeezing every last drop of engine out of it. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. They've also got the 2024 Nissan Armada. It's going to change what you expect from a full-size SUV. You can picture a rugged 4x4. It can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. You can tow bigger and explore further with the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com.
All right, so as we continue our trade deadline prep preview, we remind you to go over to WeGotNets.com, sign up for the free ebook, 5 stories in 5 days, all about the Brooklyn Nets, and keeping you alert for all the great content we have going on over there moving forward. WeGotNets.com, sign up today for your free ebook. When it comes to now the veterans, Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce O'Neale, I'm just going to put this as a blanket. Every outlet is discussing and reporting on Dorian Finney-Smith specifically. Yeah. But one of the differences here, a year ago, 2 first-round value put on him. Now that doesn't seem like it's the case. Brooklyn's still being speculated as they want a first and an equivalent of a first-round talent to move him. That doesn't look likely. He has the multiple years here, still next year, and then the player option. So the Nets also are afforded flexibility here in terms of time. I think age is not on their side when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith, and they should be in the mode of trying to move him here. Again, if you're the Brooklyn Nets, let's do first off, do you think he gets moved by the deadline here? Just individually before we talk from the Nets perspective.
I'm going to say no. And I I'm going to caveat that with, I wonder if they have like sort of misjudged this market again, but I'm going to say no. And like with Claxton, I can make a case for that being okay, though we're starting to get into an iffier zone, right? Like with the Bridges piece, the Claxton one, I'm like, okay, there's more side of keeping them that I'm just fine with, right? I think the coin lands on that side many more times. But with DFS and then some of these other guys, it's getting a little bit closer. He's a lot older, right? Like he's 30 years old. That's just not young. And even if it's not, okay, so I'm going long, but yes, I want to say no. I'm going to say no. What do you think? I think he does not get moved, and I wonder if we're feeling frustrated by it.
I don't think he gets moved. There's also been reports that like Dallas was never really that as into as was first speculated about him coming back to Dallas and what they'd be willing to offer there. We had discussions with Nick Angstadt from the Locked On Mavs podcast as well. Now there's some rumblings that maybe a team like Milwaukee would be into it. But again, asking price, right? And so from a Nets perspective, as you said in the first segment about Mikal Bridges, well, we're going to put a very high threshold because we ultimately don't want to move on from this player. We want to keep him around. And if we want to go down the Nets front office model of, well, we think maybe in the offseason we could go pursue a superstar, da-da-da-da. Okay, then having a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith might make a little bit of sense. If that doesn't pan out, while the value will then be even further diminished, it looks like the market is telling you the value has already fallen out here, right? If you were going to move Dorian Finney-Smith, the time was last year when you made the trade with Dallas, you send him out immediately for a couple of first-round picks, and you just live with that result on the back end in terms of needing to fill out your roster and what it looks like going forward.
Well, see, this is where I wonder if like Marks and company are just anchored in the wrong place, because like this is sometimes can affect your decision-making too. If your anchor is at 2 first-round picks and that market has just changed, then you're going to feel like, no, we can't do it because it's not the deal we want. But like that deal might just not ever be walking through the door again. Now, you might say to yourself, look, he's 30 years old. He makes like really very little money. I mean, 14 this year, 15 next year, player option for 15. I don't think it's like a total. I think there's a world where he picks that up too, right? He's shooting 38% from 3. He's very versatile for your team. He can play sort of like backup 5 minutes. He can defend a lot of his positions. Like the other guys, he has use this year and maybe going forward if you bring in, you know, these other guys that have been mentioned, like Donovan Mitchell, whatever. Like he can fit into a lot of different schemes. I wouldn't be crushed, but it just also, if they didn't, you know, didn't ship him. But I do sometimes wonder about like these 2 first-round pick deals where they just insist that this is what he's worth. And like, I don't know, really very few players are drawing that these days, like especially just role players. He's good. It's all compliments. He's a good player. I'm really glad he's on the team. But like this trade market, I do think a theme of this trade market is there's a few of these like sort of like super role players that teams value very highly. They kind of want to be blown away. But when you're the other team, you're like, I'm going to give 2 first-round picks, even late ones for Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, I don't know. That doesn't feel good. So, like, this is what I think is happening with, like, Alex Caruso and some other guys. Rightfully so. Like, the Bulls should keep these guys, or keep him. But I do think there's a gap with, like, just this kind of guy. Role player, not a star, 4th, 5th best player on your team. I think it's hard to think about giving up multiple first-round picks for a guy like it. It might be hard to think about giving 1 first-round pick up for a guy like this.
Yeah, and this is where, you know, you mentioned, we talk about this before, of what is a first-round pick value, right? There's the lottery pick, and then there's the everything else kind of first-round pick. And so other teams should think about that differently, right? We say 2 first-round picks. We should associate that the way that it's being intended. Deep playoff team, going to be a 25 to 30 pick in the first round for a couple of years. That's fine. But the Nets should also be flexible in, hey, did you make a first-round pick, late first-round pick on a guy that maybe is underwhelmed a little bit and is under 23 years old? You can put him in the mix, and that helps us. Or
they should also be willing to take back less than what has been offered before or whatever, too. Like,
the market might have just changed the table and say it was 2 first-round picks a year ago, so we have to get the equivalent. No, you don't. It doesn't. It's not as valuable today, and that's your own mistake. And this is the old throwing good money after bad, essentially, of saying, well, we can't possibly now. Okay, keep walking down the path of this player's value diminishing until, as you said, he probably will pick up that player option. Why? Because you can name a dozen veteran role players in his kind of mold that leave whatever team, get out of a contract, and they end up signing veteran minimums. The Nets have a guy in Lonnie Walker right now on their team that has a serviceable role that does not make a lot of money. So all of a sudden it becomes a little bit of a devil's bargain in terms of how far you want to move down this road. And you can make the case the Nets have already passed the point of no return on actually getting what they perceive to be value on him.
But it's also an easy story to tell themselves because of the things I mentioned before. He's versatile. Everyone loves him too. Like he's a great guy. Everyone, he's a good player. Everyone loves him. He fits a lot of different things your team doesn't have, especially with Sharp out. Like you can do a lot. If you're a team that's still kind of trying to win, it's good to have him around, right? So like this is like sort of the problem I think at times with the Nets way of thinking is that they're, because they're still kind of trying to win, right? And then like that could stop them from making maybe good sort of like basketball decisions around some of these guys that are like 30 years old that aren't maybe going to be on the team in 2 years. And for a team that has very little, the team that could use every draft pick it could get, right? Like they could use every draft pick here and just taking, not capitalizing opportunities, even if they're worse than they were before. I don't know. This is another close call for me. I do not think he gets traded though. I think he's going to be on the team following 3:00 or whatever the trade deadline is.
Yeah, following 4:00 trade.
4:00, sorry.
Which it's okay. We'll all decide how we feel about it by 3:00. We'll make our firm decisions. No, I agree with you too. Again, contract control, all of that good stuff. The other then veteran that we look at here is Royce O'Neale, and this is where there's a little bit of a trickle down effect. There's one other player. So I'm actually going to go quickly to Lonnie Walker. And then in our final segment, we'll talk about Royce O'Neale and talk about some of the youth on this team, specifically coming out of that last game in Jalen Wilson. Lonnie Walker is garnering in some interest too now. And this is a great example of 1-year contract. Do you plan on bringing him back? If not, again, there's almost nothing that's too low to take on a player if you don't intend to retain him in the long term. This is again, short-sightedness maybe of the Brooklyn Nets organization on this player.
What do you mean, like in terms of like not trading Walker? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you have him right now and you don't think you're going to re-sign him in the offseason, then getting anything for him is better than nothing later. And all these trade exceptions that we talk about that all get listed out here, guess what? Multiple ones just expired on the 6th for the Brooklyn Nets. They don't get used. So these things don't matter.
Well, that was always the biggest joke. Those things were never getting used. Those trade exceptions. Like I could have, we talked yesterday about how much money I would have bet on like the Royce O'Neale thing. It would have been a close number on me betting on the Nets not using their trade exceptions. Like that was just so obvious. Anyway, with Walker, he's funny. Like $2 million clearly has outplayed it. He's had some. That seemed to maybe they're the only team seemed to sort of run bad with these guys getting injured right at the trade deadline. Like last year, Harris was hurt at the trade deadline. Curry was hurt at the trade deadline. Lonnie Walker's hurt. DFS is hurt. Like everyone's kind of hurt around the time you might want to trade them. Nothing too bad. Maybe that stops teams from looking at it. It's also one of these things like with Lonnie. Again, a lot of these teams that are trading for playoff guys. Teams that are trading might be in the playoff hunt. You sometimes want to imagine sort of like where a guy will fit in your playoff scheme. And he's really good, but he's not exactly probably going to be on the court for like long stretches in the playoffs, you wouldn't think. And so the price
for a buried asset on your bench.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel bad because I know sometimes I'm like, he's been awesome. It's not that. It's just that it's harder to find the fit. I don't see him moving though.
Neither do I, but I would say briefly here, if you could get one, maybe a couple second-round picks, something like that, whatever it may look like, fringe playoff teams actually, I think would be better suited to pursue a guy like Walker than deep playoff guys. To your point, the bench gets shorter. But if I'm an edge team, I'm in the play-in tournament. Hey, guess what? Lonnie Walker could move the needle a little bit for you.
Like the Milwaukee. I can see like Milwaukee needing a guy like him, right? Yep. Like sort of like behind Dame, not a point guard, but gives you some scoring, can score at 3 levels, like. I think he would fit there as just a little respite and make sure you had like a scorer off the bench, which they don't really have. Like I could see, I'm just throwing a team out there. I don't think they're going to trade for it, but like, yes, I like not going to play a ton in the playoffs, but could really help you for the rest of the regular season.
Of course. So coming up here in a second, let's take a look at Royce O'Neale expiring contract, how he's standing in the way of Jalen Wilson from fully blooming into a rotational player for the Brooklyn Nets, and whether or not we ultimately think we'll find ourselves disappointed when the trade deadline finally ends. We'll get into that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. It's demon time on Prize Picks. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. Like I said, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct payouts. These are all over the site too, these demons and goblins. It's really cool too, because you're going to go over to Prize Picks. Prize Picks took the very coolest ways to play daily fantasy. You're just going to go more or less on the Prize Picks projections, and then they throw in these demons and goblins too. So if you go over what's happening here on Sunday, look at guys like Brock Purdy. You might have a demon there for more than 299.5 passing yards. That's a ton, but guess what? That pays out a lot more. You get the goblin going at 199.5. Not going to pay out the same exact number on that one, but it's a little easier number to stomach when you're watching the big game. And just get the 200 more or less there on the Brock Purdy number. I can sink my teeth into something like that. Prize Picks is so simple to play. You put together 4 to 5 different plays, go more or less on the Prize Picks projections. You can even combine sports, put together NFL, NBA plays all in one. They just took all the most fun ways to do this stuff. Put it on one platform. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we wrap up our trade deadline preview for the Brooklyn Nets, let's quickly, because Royce O'Neale, we talked about him before, expiring contract, playing really well, hitting some nice late game threes for the Brooklyn Nets. Might actually be critical for them actually being in some of these games. And ironically, he is healthy. He is playing. I love Royce. Basically, all the guys we talk about the Nets may be trading, I love them as players. I think they're great players. They contribute. It's wonderful. He is a guy that I think should be traded. I think will be traded. Yeah. And there's this one-to-one correlation. Talked about him earlier in the season. Played against the Mavericks, looked good. Jalen Wilson is ready for a role to me at the NBA level. And if he isn't, then you don't draft a 22-year-old player as the Brooklyn Nets did. You have to clear out a veteran at some point to open up minutes for a kid like this.
Yeah, I had to trade him. If it's a second round pick, it's a second round pick. What are we doing here? They just have young guys that are coming up behind him. He's 30. They got him on a good contract. He's outplayed the contract right now. He's been a really important guy for this team over the last couple of years. He's done everything you ask him for him. It's time to just it was a bit of a head scratcher when they traded a first for him before. You cannot be anchored, like I said before, in that first, because that, even at the time, I remember our reaction was like, oh, that's pretty steep. First round pick for Royce O'Neale.
Looks steeper once they traded all the stars away.
Right. It looks way worse. But again, he's played really well. It feels like he's played as good as you can possibly. I mean, thank God he's making these threes. Yep. So other teams can kind of look at that and say, yeah, this is something that will work for us. Just has to be out the door. He's one. I can make the excuses for the other guys about why it might make sense to stick around, mostly because either they're young and you're signing to a new contract, or they're just already under contract for a while.
Yep.
He's just expiring. They go find someone that can give you a second for him or something like that. And if you can get more, go for it. This would be, if he was still on the team, either there was just zero market, or, which feels a little hard to believe because he makes no money either, like $9 million, or they just have the wrong goals here. Right. Yep. And this is a la sort of what happened last year. Now they were able to get off the Mills stuff and the Harris stuff this year and unload those contracts. But this is just a different thing. This is the Seth Curry thing. It's you're just going to lose them for nothing. And he actually, unlike Curry, I think that he probably can fetch you at least something here.
Yeah, and some of those things, getting off of Mills and getting off of Harris, it wasn't just a freebie. You had to manipulate money and attach things, to make those happen, to get off the money off your books. In Royce O'Neale's case, I'll put out these couple of scenarios very quickly. I mentioned this, I think, to you off podcast. You go and you look at a team like the Detroit Pistons, who say they want a little more floor spacing shooters on the outside to help the young team. They have a second round pick from Memphis or Washington. Those are two teams that are probably going to be towards the bottom. So you can look at that as being, that's almost a back end first round pick. Make that type of move. I'll also point out, even though you think it's unlikely you would do any type of trades with the New York Knicks, if I hear Quentin Grimes dealing with a knee injury right now, but they talked about wanting to move on to him because of where his contract is. You and I were a massive fan of him coming out of the draft. I would do a 1-to-1 player swap to bring in a young player that you think has upside for you. I think that's where the Nets
Who is the player? I just missed the name.
Quentin Grimes for the Knicks.
Oh, Quentin Grimes. Gotcha.
Because they're ready to move off of him because they're not going to bring him back. They're not going to, new contract, all that stuff with him. So, okay, great. Young player, upside, great. Give me one of those players. It doesn't have to just be multiple second round picks. the proven commodities at the NBA level in terms of having a sample size on guys is just as important as another dart throw in the second round. That being the case, I really don't have anybody else. Dennis Smith Jr. is not going anywhere. Again, Dinwiddie, right, would be the other guy. I assume he's not going anywhere because who's giving you anything for him unless it's a part of one of those 3-team deals where the Nets end up with something.
Man, the Dinwiddie situation is so weird. It is. I actually don't know because I don't think he's going to get traded. I think he really wants to be traded, right? And I wonder if
he sees himself as still being someone that should be able to contribute and be in a better role for himself somewhere else too.
There's been rumblings for a while now that the Nets might have even. I don't even want to report this, but there's been rumblings that he might have thought
something was going to happen, and
he thought maybe something was going to happen. I don't think that's been widely reported. The energy level has been weird. If you look at, there's some random videos that have come out here too about his during the Mavericks game, he just sat at the scorer's table while Jacques Vaughn was talking to the rest of the team. Looked totally disengaged, but they still play him a lot of minutes. So this is why it's a really confusing thing. It's because he seems disengaged at times, but then the Nets are also oh yeah, but you can also, play 35 minutes and sometimes guard the other team's best player. So it's okay, well, that really wouldn't track with a guy who the team just wanted to be rid of. So I can't really tell what is true or what's made up here around Dinwiddie or what is just personality and what's disinterested or disgruntled or whatever. I don't see much of a market for him. He's done himself, and the Nets have done them no favors here with just his overall play over the last couple of weeks. Right. I think it's a lot harder to probably look at him and try to imagine him coming in and making a big difference for a team because he's really not been a difference maker at all for the Nets, especially in the offensive end where it's been long stretches of just forgetting he's on the court. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's going to be a market for him. But I also wonder if I actually wonder if he'd be a buyout candidate or something. I think that will be be maybe not. And this is maybe where the conjectures have gone too far, but there's just been so many things sort of brought up either off the cuff or straight out said by reporters or whatever. I find this situation to be very confusing because at the one hand, I can make a strong case that he looks totally out of it, doesn't want to be on the team, looks pissed off. But then the way the team uses him at times wouldn't suggest that at all. So I'm kind of lost here, but I could really literally see anything from on the team, traded, or even bought out, though I think the bought out thing is very unlikely.
Yeah, I find the buyout component interesting. And to your point, it's also maybe because he's getting a little bit older and he's the oldest player on the team and he's lost a little bit of a step and he's lost some of his up, right? And maybe there's a frustration just about, I thought I was going to be able to be a certain guy for this team and I'm not. And with the return of Ben Simmons, even though you have concerns about his health, it changes the hierarchy of this thing, right? Cam Thomas has a bigger role now, Dennis Smith Jr. So all of a sudden, you can envision this version of the team where Spencer Dinwiddie should be getting pushed out of his role, but the Nets always struggle with these types of decisions when it comes to the rotation. In the end, we'll be back in, obviously, live for the coverage on Thursday as the deadline approaches. But we land on, we think Royce O'Neale, right? We both agree Royce O'Neale is probably the likeliest to be traded, and I think will be traded ultimately. Everybody else, I think Nets fans should be prepared for disappointment because I don't think that you're going to see big moves like you're hoping for.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. I think it's going to be Mikal, Claxton, DFS on the team, Royce traded, and Dinwiddie, I'm willing to just put a huge question mark. That could be related to other deals too. One other thing before we get out of here, and then we'll take a few things in YouTube. I know people stuck around here forever. I will say, facilitating a 3-team deal, that could be something they're waiting on also. And so go ahead.
That was going to be my caveat, was just Dorian Finney-Smith, does a team get desperate, or Spencer Dinwiddie 3-team deals. We've heard the Murray rumors and the Lakers and everything else, right? They're maybe it is, as you say, they're posturing on the value they want for guys just to wait to see as these needs start to unfold for other teams. Okay, we'll help you out getting the guy you want. It's just going to take some extra draft capital to make it happen, right? That would be the shrewd move by Sean Marks, and we've seen him do this over the years. So if you want to be optimistic, it's that the Nets are just positioning themselves to be the key pivot team for several squads that want to really improve for playoff runs.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated everyone here that jumped into YouTube.
Oh,
We'll hang around a few minutes here in YouTube live. Go throw in a Locked On Nets. We'll bring up some questions, answer them here as we go late into the night on Tuesday. Make sure you go to wegotnets.com to grab that free ebook.
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. That's Emily Dickinson.
Oh, my goodness. One of the all-time great literal poets. We'll be back again tomorrow in a moment on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.